Hi there, in my last video I showed you how we can view and process podcast transcriptions on our iPhones. Today I'm going to show you how we can automate this using Siri Shortcuts. I'll be using Siri Shortcuts in conjunction with the Pyto app. Pyto costs $7.99 in UK pounds and US dollars from the App Store, but it does give you more flexibility compared with the inbuilt scripting actions on Siri Shortcuts. It's a Python interpreter. You can build code in Pyto, but I'm just going to be using it in Siri Shortcuts. In order to get this to work, we need to understand some of the steps that we need to follow. So the first thing we need to do is we need to know the podcast feed that we want to grab the latest episode for. This is called a podcast RSS feed, and a podcast RSS feed is basically a web address that contains all of the links for all of the episodes that belong to that podcast show. Now we only want to get the most recent show, and that is its own link, and we call that an enclosure, and normally it's an MP3 file. But it can be other audio formats, and it can even be videos. But we're going to get the most recent MP3 enclosure. Once we know that, we need to download that onto our device. And when we've downloaded that file, we just want to add it to an Apple Note. And from there, we actually have to do a little bit of manual processing. We have to open up Apple Notes, where the podcast episode will be transcribed, and we can listen to that podcast episode within Apple Notes. So with all those steps out of the way, let's start building. So I've got my iPhone here, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find out the web address for a podcast feed that I'm going to use for this workflow. And the one I'm going to use a website called CastOS, and it has a tool in it that finds the RSS or podcast feed for any podcast, or for the most common ones anyway. So the one I'm going to use today is the Pivot podcast. It's a really popular podcast hosted every Tuesday and Friday by Cara Swisher and Scott Galloway. I'm going to copy that feed, and I'm going to use that as I build my Siri Shortcut. So let's go back to my home screen and open up Siri Shortcut. When you open up Siri Shortcuts, you'll be presented with a grid with shortcuts or automations you've already created, and if you haven't done this before, then this will be empty. I'm going to tap on the plus button to start building my shortcut, and normally the first thing I do is I go to the drop down at the top, and that will open up a menu, and I normally choose rename, and I rename it from new shortcut, whatever a number is, to something a bit more meaningful so I know where it is later on. I'm going to call this one Pivot Show. Tap on done. And so now I've renamed it, and now I can start searching through my actions. Now the first action I want is one called URL. And this will be where we tell the shortcut the address of that podcast feed. Now we need to tap in the area, and then we can tap on paste, and we're going to paste that web address. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we are going to run a Python script on that web address. Now I'm going to go into search actions, and I'm going to choose Pyto for my next action, and the one I'm going to choose is run code. So I'm going to tap on run code, and I'm going to expand my code window. Now I've already grabbed the code before. Now I don't know this from scratch. What I had to do was I had to use ChatGPT, and I'll show you the prompt that I used. So let's just escape from that window now and go into ChatGPT. I'm just going to show you the prompts that I used, which helped me generate the Python code. Now I could have figured this out myself because I do know some Python code. However, it would have taken me ages, whereas this took me about 15 or 20 minutes. So here's the prompt that I used. I said, give me Python code that will match the first MP3 enclosure of any RSS feed and return that match without requiring additional libraries or modules installed. The reason I added the prompt at the end about not requiring additional libraries is because I'm running this in iOS. So you don't have quite the same extensibility and the same ability to install modules and libraries that you would have in the full fat version of Python that you might run on VS Code or in a coding environment on your desktop. And it did generate code, and you might find that you have to have a couple of goes of back and forth to refine that code, and you might have to fix errors. That's totally okay, but it will generate workable code within a short period of time. Let's go back to my Siri shortcut, and I'm going to paste in the final code that I used. Okay, so I'm back in my Siri shortcut. I'm going to tap to open up that action where I've got my code window, and I'm going to paste the final version of that code that I created. I've cheated a little bit. I copied it from an earlier version of that Siri shortcut. Now it's nearly correct, except there was a placeholder for the web address for the RSS podcast feed. So what I did was I needed to clear that variable, and within those quotation marks I need to provide that web address. Now I could have actually typed that in directly without using that URL. That would have worked totally fine, but I'm going to grab that web address, and in Siri Shortcuts there's the ability to use what we call variables or placeholders of values that we have earlier on within our code or shortcut. If I tap on select variable, that will open up the magic variable selector, and basically you can choose any value to use later on. And I'm going to tap on where it says URL, and that will add it within my Python code. Tap on done, and now that code is finished. Now the next thing we need to do is also search for Pyto, and we're going to run another Pyto action, and this time the Pyto action will get the result of that Python script so we can use it later on within our shortcut. I'm going to tap on get script output. So now we can grab that MP3 enclosure to use later on within our shortcut. Next thing we're going to do is get contents of URL. So what that will do is that will download that MP3 enclosure onto our local device, onto our iPhone. And once we've done that, we need to place that downloaded MP3 file into Apple Notes. So I'm going to search for an action called append to note. It's going to append that downloaded file, contents of URL, to a note, and we have to say which note we're going to be using. So I'm going to tap on that space for notes, and I'm going to choose a note, and I've already created a note called pivot. That's where I'm going to append the note to. Once I'm happy with that, I think that's finished. So it's finished now, so I'm going to check that it works by tapping on the play button. Now the first time you run it, it will prompt you whether you're going to allow it once or always allow. Now because I ran this before, it's not going to prompt me, but you'll find that there's a display bug, and it will say there was a problem running the shortcut. It looks like it's broken, but if I actually go into Apple Notes, you'll see that the audio recording has been embedded. If we tap on that recording, you'll see that it will transcribe the text for that episode. Now I found it takes about 1 minute to transcribe an hour-long podcast. Newer iPhones, iPhone 15 Pro, 15 Pro Max, and any iPhone 16 will also give you the opportunity to use Apple Intelligence to generate AI summaries of that particular episode. And once it's finished doing its transcribing work, we can actually tap on the play button and listen along in real time and follow along with the text. So what we've got here is we have an episode, we have our own podcast player in Apple Notes, and we can use the Siri Shortcuts as our own podcatcher without additional software. Now, I don't recommend that you download hundreds of episodes, because you will soon fill up all of the space on your iPhone. But it is a really, really neat way of exploring how automation works, as well as having basically a caption or subtitle tool within your podcast application. And you can see I've got the text here. So if I tap on play, support for this show comes from, you can see that it follows along with that text. Tap on done, and you can see you get a little abstract of that transcription as well. So there you have it. I hope you've enjoyed what you've seen today. If you do, please comment, please like, please subscribe, and I'll be back in a few more days with more workflows about various automations, whether it's in Linux, iOS, or other fascinating technology. So stay safe and healthy and happy, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. Take care.